Hey there, pirates! Welcome aboard the Anime No Me channel. The first thing we need to admit is that Oda never does anything by chance. Every tiny detail that seems exaggerated, out of place, or simply cool usually carries within it a trace of the future. And when we think about this, the issue of swords with zoan fruits doesn't seem as absurd as it did when it was first revealed back in chapter 211 that Spandam's sword, the famous Funkfried, had eaten an elephant fruit. Back then, it seemed almost like a joke. An elephant sword? Really? But today, after everything we've seen, I think that moment was the first time Oda blatantly showed us that the world of zoans was much more flexible and experimental than we had imagined. And now, after so many years, when we finally saw that Shanks' brother, Figurlin York, or maybe Figurlin Garling, depending on what you believe, has a sword that possesses the mythical zoan of Cerberus, I can't help but think that this detail was revealed not only to show the absurd level of power of the families who control the world's backstage, but also to lay the groundwork for what may come with characters like Shanks, and especially with Zoro. Because if the sword of a backstage character, no matter how important, already has a three-headed mythical zoan, a creature that practically represents the border between the world of the living and the world of the departed, then what's to stop protagonist swords from following this same logic? Especially when we remember that Oda has already stated in an interview that he was very interested in seeing Zoro's sword with Kaido's fruit. And we might think, was that a joke? A provocation to the fandom? Maybe. But when the author himself makes such a comment, and then we see in chapter 1049, Kaido seemingly losing his life, the space opens up. And not just that, it opens up in a way that makes sense within the logic of the One Piece world. Because now we know that swords can eat fruits, that mythical zoans can merge with inanimate objects, and that this type of fusion doesn't need to be grotesque or lose its aesthetic balance. It can be functional, it can be part of destiny. And Zoro, more than any other character, has swords that carry a type of soul. From the Sandai Kitetsu to Enma, we can see that his blades are not just tools. They have wills, and maybe even dreams, as if they were almost living beings that have not fully awakened yet. And here's something I've been thinking about since we saw Enma absorb Zoro's haki in chapter 1032. Because that scene wasn't just about training, it was a clear demonstration that the sword reacts. That it's not just shaped by the user, but also shapes the user. And if a sword can have this kind of reaction to the presence of haki, why couldn't it have a latent zone inside, waiting for something to awaken it? Maybe Enma came from the ancient kingdom itself. Maybe it had already been shaped with a zoan core before even reaching Odin's hands. Or maybe now that Kaido has seemingly left and his fruit is available again in the world, this energy could be absorbed by a worthy sword. A sword like Enma, or even another one. And when I think about Kaido's fruit, the blue dragon that controls flames, clouds, and lightning, I can't imagine any other weapon that would be worthy of this power other than the blade of a swordsman who has already defied the impossible. At this point in the story, Zoro has crossed the boundary between ordinary humans and the impossible multiple times. He's survived fatal attacks, faced beings that should be above his level, and still, he moved forward. Not because he was stronger, but because he was more determined, more stubborn, and maybe, just maybe, what was missing for a sword to truly awaken in his hands was a mythical soul. Something that resonates with the thirst for destruction that he suppresses within, with the silent will he carries to become number one, not because he wants to be adored, but because he made a promise. And promises, in this world, carry a weight beyond logic. And then, there's the detail that stands out to me the most. Kaido himself used a kanabo, a giant club, but not a sword. And if he had been defeated by a swordsman, and if his soul or legacy were reabsorbed by the concept of the blade itself, it's not absurd to think that the world would respond to this with a new form of balance. Maybe Kaido's fruit was partially absorbed on the battlefield, even if no one noticed. Wano was a place surrounded by myths, and myths sometimes act as catalysts for things that the science of the One Piece world hasn't yet explained. If Spandam's sword ate a fruit, maybe a sword could drink the spirit of a dragon. And here comes the idea of the griffin. Because if Shanks' brother has a sword with the fruit of Cerberus, 3 heads, connection to the underworld, and the sword almost seems like a creature in itself, Shanks, as the central figure, as the symbol of balance, might carry a sword that contrasts with Cerberus, the griffin, a being that represents the sky, wisdom, and ferocity, a fusion of lion and eagle, maybe an entity that symbolizes power and balance between air and earth. And if Shanks is indeed one of the 4 pillars of the world, the direct opposite of Kaido, then it makes sense that his sword would carry this charge of wild nobility. The griffin would be the balance between domination and freedom. And if Shanks uses such a blade, then Zoro, who is constantly between chaos and honor, might eventually need to carry something that represents the wild side of justice, the dragon. And the blue dragon is not just a symbol of destruction. He is, in various mythologies, the guardian of forbidden gates, the same role that Zoro has been occupying throughout the story. Always the first to rise, the last to fall. Always in front, always on the line. As if he were, in fact, the gate between Luffy and the rest of the world. Maybe he needs a sword that embodies this role. That represents the ancestral roar Kaido left behind. And then we start to see how all this connects. Oda, whether he likes it or not, has already put this in front of us. Maybe subtly, maybe not fully developed yet, but the elements are there. Chapter 10. Zoro uses Ashura against Kaido, and Kaido says that he also has the scent of Conqueror's Haki. This is not small, this is revelation. And Ashura, let's remember, is a spiritual projection, a being with multiple arms and swords, a warrior demon. So tell me, what's the limit of this? If he can already summon it with the power of his mind and Haki, what would happen if his sword responded with a real mythical soul? And if Enma, when confronted with Kaido's fruit, recognized the echo of this power and accepted absorbing it as an extension of its fury? I believe that the world of One Piece is heading toward a point where swords and their users will no longer be treated as 2 separate entities. They will merge. They will vibrate at the same frequency. And Zoro is closer to this than any other character because he has always treated his swords as extensions of his own body. He bleeds with them. He feels when one is unworthy. He resists when one tries to dominate him, as was the case with Enma. And only when he accepted it, and it accepted him back, did they become one. Maybe the next phase will be this. The final fusion, the awakening of a sword with its own soul, but with the legendary spirit of a mythical fruit inside. Something that transforms the fight into a dance, the blade into a creature, and the swordsman into a living legend. But if Kaido's blue dragon isn't the chosen one, maybe the path will be different. Maybe Oda will look for a mythology that better fits Zoro's spiritual role within the narrative. And there, inevitably, we arrive at 2 figures that I think make much more sense than they might seem at first glance. The first is the Kirin, a creature from Chinese and Japanese mythology that is seen as a sort of divine messenger. Part deer, part dragon, with horse hooves and a mane resembling flames. It is not aggressive by nature, but appears only in the presence of great events. Sometimes at the birth of a king, other times when someone with a pure soul is about to make a major decision. And I think maybe the Kirin carries exactly this duality that Zoro lives. Because Zoro is not an assassin, but he's not a pure hero either. He is someone who cuts what needs to be cut, who carries the burden of violence so that others don't have to. And the Kirin represents exactly that, contained power, strength waiting for the right moment, and if a sword with the Hydra Zone were wielded by a swordsman like Zoro, who is already known for using multiple blades, maybe that would manifest in a symbolic way. Maybe he could temporarily multiply his cuts, as if the sword echoed through the air, creating overlapping images, ghostly cuts, all with real weight. Maybe Ashura's ability, which is basically a spiritual projection, would be enhanced by this fruit, as if the sword were the materialization of Ashura, a Hydra head for each face of the deity Zoro invokes with his Haki. And this makes me also think of something that is always in the background when the topic is mythical zoans, the concept of awakening. Because we haven't yet seen fully an object with a zone awakening. But what if it were possible? What if in the case of a sword, it meant that it would gain not just form, but intention? Perhaps it wouldn't move on its own like Funkfried. Perhaps it wouldn't need to. Maybe the awakening would be more internal, as if the blade, upon awakening, began to guide the swordsman's hand, or merge its decisions with those of the user. Something like a dance, an agreement, a bond. Then there's a third creature I think is worth mentioning, because Zoro, despite all his brutality, carries within him a great respect for the souls that have passed. He honors the dead, he keeps his promises, and he carries the Wado Ichimonji, which is Kuina's sword, but also a relic of his past. So maybe Oda will go even further down a spiritual path. Maybe the mythical zoan that one of his swords receives will be something like the Tengu, a supernatural being from Japanese mythology that is half man, half bird, and lives in the mountains, isolated, training incessantly until achieving the absolute mastery of the sword. The Tengu is seen as a being of wisdom, but also of arrogance. It's often depicted as an ancient swordsman who distanced himself from the world because he couldn't find anyone worthy of his blade. Does this remind you of anyone? I think Zoro is already, by essence, a spiritual disciple of this archetype. And if one of his swords incorporated the Tengu Zoan, maybe the effect would be this. Not a physical transformation, but an elevation of technique, as if for moments he could summon the presence of masters from the past. Cuts that transcend time, forgotten styles, speed so absurd that the sound comes after the blade. And this makes me think of something that maybe Oda is saving for the final saga, the real origin of the black swords. Because so far, all we know is that a sword turns black when it's used with haki for a long time. But this seems too vague for the level of detail Oda likes to work with. Maybe a black sword is not just a sword used with haki. Maybe it's a sword that has gone through an awakening. Maybe it's the final marriage of blade, soul, fruit, and will. That was today's content. We hope you liked it and want to share your opinion on the subject. Don't forget to share the video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and stay amazing.